So organic molecules that we've talked about so far, we've been talking about hydrocarbons. So they're made out of just those hydrogen and carbon atoms. But not all of the organic molecules are just hydrogen and carbon. So a lot of them have added what we call functional groups. And a functional group is an atom or a group of atoms in an organic molecule that's the site of chemical reactions. So these functional groups allow these hydrocarbons to interact with other molecules and can give a compound its unique chemical properties. So generally, hydrocarbons are not super reactive. They will react, for example, if you ignite them, but they tend to not react with other molecules and so forth. But if they have a functional group, they do interact and react with other molecules. And this is because they usually have multiple bonds. So they have multiple bonds between an oxygen or a nitrogen, so they can rebond and make single covalent bonds with something else. Or they have lone pairs of electrons that are just kind of hanging out, which that they can bond with other atoms to be able to make a new covalent bond. They are represented by specific structure diagrams. So as I go through this, you're going to see little yellow pictures with chemical diagrams drawn. I'll point them out as we go along. So each of them is represented by their own structure diagram. So let's take a look at the first one. The first one we're going to look at as far as the functional group is an alcohol. So alcohols are where you have an organic compound, usually a hydrocarbon, that is formed by replacing one or more of the hydrogens on that hydrocarbon with what we call a hydroxyl group. So a hydroxyl group is an oxygen and a hydrogen, OH. So you can see here, this is a hydrocarbon, carbon. They didn't put the hydrogens on there because they kind of assume that you know that these single bonds that are sticking out, we have an organic molecule, it's hydrocarbon in this case. But we've got a carbon, and one of those hydrogens in this case has been replaced with an oxygen and a hydrogen. So this is the hydroxyl group. So these guys are named based on the hydrocarbon that they were formed out of. So you can see down here, this guy was originally methane because it was originally carbon with 4 hydrogens. And so the alcohol is called methanol. And the common name is, I know, shockingly enough, methyl alcohol. So sometimes they actually work to make the names pretty simple. And then you've got ethanol. It's 2 carbons, and we've replaced one of those hydrogens with that OH, that hydroxyl group. This one is ethanol made out of ethane. This is ethyl alcohol. This is propanol made out of propane, C3H8. Here's where they replace, where the functional group is, the OH. It's not out on the end, it's down here. But this guy, this specific type of propanol, because you'll see it has a number, that's actually indicating where that hydroxyl has gone. But this one is isopropyl alcohol. This is rubbing alcohol. So the stuff that you would buy at like the grocery store or drugstore for cleaning cuts and so forth. And you can see these guys do have low melting points. So, negative melting points, they are going to be liquid at room temperature. Boiling points, a little high, but not as high as water. So they do boil lower than water does. So let's talk a little bit about alcohols. So they are going to be chemically similar because they have that hydroxyl group. So they're going to have chemical properties in common. They are going to be a little different from each other if they have those different base hydrocarbons, just because the more carbons you add, it slightly alters their properties. But one thing that they all have in common is that they are toxic to humans. So all of these alcohols are toxic to humans. In fact, if you read the label on something like methanol or isopropyl alcohol, you will see, do not consume, toxic. Ethanol is the one exception. Ethanol is not toxic to us in limited quantities. Ethanol is the alcohol that you find in things like beer and wine and spirits. What organisms make ethanol? So you may be familiar if you've ever seen anything about how to make beer and wine, or if you're familiar with making bread, because this organism also is used to make bread. And hopefully you've figured it out, and that is yeast. So what yeast do is they take sugar and eat it. When they do that, they make alcohol as their waste. I know, it's kind of gross if you think about it. So that's actually how we get the ethanol that we consume. There's other ways to get that ethanol. And the ethanol that we also make, we can make ethanol from corn and so forth. We can actually use it in a small amount as fuel. So this is why you may have started to see this little sign on gas stations, because we can actually add it to our gas. We can't use a lot of it because it'll burn too hot, but we can add some of it to help boost our gas. And the small chain alcohols are highly flammable. So small chain meaning, you know, methanol, ethanol, propanol, those guys are going to be highly flammable and water soluble. Once you get up to some of the bigger ones, the properties change a little bit, again, because of the number of carbons that are there. So what else about alcohol? Well, there's a lot we can talk about alcohol, but there is one thing that I just want to talk about because people usually have a question about it. And that is, what does proof mean? Because if you look on spirits like rum and whiskey, scotch, those kinds of things, vodka, there's going to be a proof number on there. And proof is double the ethanol concentration by volume in alcoholic beverages. So what do I mean? So if something is labeled as 80 proof, that means that there's 40% alcohol in it, 40% ethanol, and then 60% water. So the reason why it was called proof is because it was the proof that there was alcohol in it. So they used to actually ignite it back in the day. With distillation, we can create 190 proof. So we can't create pure ethanol, but we can get 190 proof. And no, I can't remember what that is off the top of my head. So that's 95. I don't know why I couldn't remember that. So we can get 95% ethanol, but not 100%. But that's okay because we can't consume 100%. We can't even consume 95%. If you find something that is that high of a proof, then it actually says on there to not consume it as is. You have to mix it with something in order to make it safe to drink. Now, something you may have seen around, I actually have this right now because a lot of the hand sanitizers, if you've gotten hand sanitizers that are alcohol-based, actually contain ethanol, but it's denatured alcohol. And what does that mean? It's ethanol with chemicals added to it. So acetone, formaldehyde, and other chemicals have been added to it. You might be wondering, so why do we do that? It makes it impossible to drink. The Acetone and formaldehyde, especially if you ever smell denatured alcohol, or for example, like I said, I have it as hand sanitizer. And if I forget after I've used it to wash my hands and accidentally, you know, like get something on my fingers and lick it, yeah, it tastes like nail polish remover. It's really gross. So these chemicals keep you from being able to drink denatured alcohol. It also is used as a solvent. So we make denatured alcohol not for drinking, but to use for cleanup, disinfection, that sort of thing, because it works as a great solvent to dissolve things. All right. Our next functional group is the group of alkaloids. These are complex molecules containing nitrogen atoms. So if you look down here, these are hydrocarbons. They do have hydrocarbon rings all over the place. They have hydrocarbons coming off the sides, but there are nitrogens that are attached and buried on the molecule. And so why would we care about these? Well, these alkaloids, these nitrogen atoms, allow these molecules to do something that's kind of interesting. And that is they create acid salts, aka tannins, that are water soluble. And so that's what you're actually seeing down here. This is caffeine, and caffeine plus phosphoric acid creates caffeine phosphoric acid salt, which is water soluble. And you might be able to guess what this is from. I'm hoping maybe you figured it out. This one's from coffee, right? And these tannins, these acid salts, are more soluble in hot water. This is why we brew things like tea and coffee and hot chocolate in hot water and not cold water, because it will pull more of these acid salts, more of these tannins. Caffeine's just one. There are actually lots of these tannins in tea leaves and coffee beans and cocoa beans that are these complex nitrogen-containing molecules. And so that hot water is going to make this process work better and make these more soluble, so more of them will come out. And so they are found in those common drinks like I was talking about, hot chocolate, coffee, tea. You can see down here, they're also found in wine. So there are different types of tannins that come into wine. There are, you can see grape seeds, there's tannin powder. The oak, the barrels that they're in actually provide tannins as well. All of this plus the grape skins are actually what create the color of the wine. And so what can these alkaloids be used for? What can these tannins be used for? I don't know if any of you have ever done it, at least on purpose, but they can be used as natural dyes. They are really good at working as a dye. Once they are back out of water, after they've attached themselves to fibers and so forth, they stay as a dye for quite a long time. I actually have a t-shirt that has been dyed using cocoa. So it's still very, very brown. So they work very well for natural dyes. Now, obviously, you're limited to the number of colors you have, but they work very well for natural dyes for the group of colors that they belong to. All right, I will pick up in the next video talking about the rest of the functional groups.